Sometimes I forget to, but I'm going to make sure I tell the folks online who we added to our prayer list. We added Donna Fesperman, Maria Saldana's family back in Mexico. We're praying. I think I went that whole prayer. I mentioned the ride, then forgot to pray for the ride, didn't I? Yeah, man, I tell you what. We're praying for the Carrie Eford bike run. We're praying for the Joey Eford family, and in particular, his mom, Janice. We're praying for Kent Kiker, and we're praying for Kevin Allman. And then, of course, there's other people already on our list that we are praying for. And we are in 2 Samuel chapter 4. This is an interesting chapter. I mean, they're all interesting, but this is a little different. And it's a little different of a message, actually. Especially the first part of it. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and we'll read through it, and then I'll sort of explain the angle we're taking on this. Once again, 2 Samuel chapter 4, the whole chapter, it's only 12 verses. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Now Saul's son had two men. Now that's Ishbosheth, his son. Okay, he had two men who were captains of troops. The name of one was Banah, and the name of the other was Rechab. The sons of Ramon the Beerite of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth was also was part of Benjamin, because the Beerothites fled to Gideon, and have been sojourners there until this day. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old, and the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and the nurse took him up and fled. And it happened, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Then the sons of Ramon the Beerite, Rechab and Benah, set out and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there all the way into the house, as though to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. And then Rechab and Benah, his brother, escaped. For when they came into the house, he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. Then they struck him and killed him, beheaded him, and took his head, and were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul your enemy, who sought your life. And the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants." But David answers Rechab and Benah his brother, the sons of Ramon the Beerite, and said to them, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, 'Look, Saul is dead,' thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth?" So David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. Interesting chapter, huh? They're pretty brutal chapter. So like a couple of you in your head came up, it's like, oh, now I understand what you meant by this is an interesting chapter. So, hey, so take this assignment. Go preach that chapter. We will. We'll do that. We have to figure out, okay, what is God saying to us? Just a little background here. When you look at the beginning, and it said, when Saul's son heard about Abner, Abner was Saul's son, Ishbosheth's the captain of his army. He had been the captain of Saul's army. And then Abner came along, Ishbosheth, and sort of propped up Ishbosheth as the last remaining son of Saul that was able to rule. And he propped him up in opposition to David. David's then ruler over Judah. He's ruler from down in Hebron. But then all the rest of Israel is following Ishbosheth. Well, Abner then gets into it with Ishbosheth. They have a falling out, and he goes over to David, and he makes a pact with David. But then one of David's men, Joab, gets revenge on Abner, and last chapter, stabs him in the gut, tricks him, brings him out, stabs him in the gut. Abner's dead, and now Ishbosheth and all Israel find themselves in a very difficult situation. And really, what you have here is you have a very just bad event. I mean, this is just bad. All of this is just bad. And what's it the result of? Well, I would submit to you that it's the result of people getting scared. When people get scared, and we're people, so we can add that when we get scared, when human beings get scared, we make bad mistakes, motivated by fear. And I want to share with you some of the characters here in this chapter, and that they're scared, and they're responding then in all too human ways to being scared. Now, step aside. You ever get scared? And it's, if you've been alive for any amount of years, you know that you've gotten scared before and you've handled things badly. You haven't handled things as well as you should. You ever the saying, cooler heads prevail, right? When we get scared, our adrenaline goes up. I remember this just the other day, to tell you the truth. I was golfing with a group of pastors, and one of them said something that got my adrenaline up. You might imagine a bunch of pastors happened. Said something that shot my adrenaline up, and I'd had like 5 good shots right before that, but then I couldn't hit a golf ball there for the next couple holes. Because your adrenaline goes up, you're just kind of like, whoa. Now everybody's wondering, what did he say to him? I'll get to tell you that. I'm just saying, when we get scared, our adrenaline goes up, we start to make bad decisions. And we see that a lot of times when people get scared, some bad things happen. So when we look at this, we need to look and we need to say, I need to avoid these things when I get scared. There are things that will happen in life that will scare us. And so we need, and even right there, we heard in our prayer request about scary things that happened. And now people are experiencing fear. And how are they going to respond? How are they going to react? Well, just to let you know, you look at the first verse here and you know that this is about people being scared. When Saul's son, when Ishbosheth heard that Abner had died in Hebron, now all he knows is he's been killed in Hebron. He rebelled against him. He went down and he died. And so things are falling apart in Israel at this time. And we already see these immediate characters here, but not only all the characters, but all of Israel responding to fear. So I'm going to share with you 8 things we see that can happen to us when fear takes over, when we get scared. Number 1 is this. When people get scared, we can get discouraged. We can just get discouraged. Courage is a great thing. It's great to be courageous. I've watched enough war movies and heard this said, courage is not the absence of fear. All right. Courage is something you have in the face of fear. When you are scared, it doesn't take courage. You're not scared. But then you can either have courage or be discouraged. What is discouraged? Discouraged is a lack of courage. And so our character here for this is Ishbosheth himself, referred to here as Saul's son. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart. He lost heart. There are some other translations right there that very simply say he lost courage. What does it mean that he lost heart? They would translate it as he lost courage. The actual phrase used there, the actual Hebrew phrase that's used there, means his hands became slack. Now, hands become slack. I want to give you a common vernacular we use in English for hands became slack. He's losing a grip. Your hands become slack. He's losing a grip. His ability to deal with this situation is severely diminished. And where do you find him? You find him in the middle of the day laying in bed. All right? Sounds to me like he's depressed, doesn't it? Like he's gone into depression. He's gotten completely discouraged. He's lost a grip. He's lost heart. He's lost courage. But it's not only the Ishbosheth that's named here. There's also then the nation of Israel as a whole. It goes on in verse 1, it says, and all Israel was troubled. And what I'll give you for this, number 2, is sometimes when people get scared, we can get panicky. We get panicky. We panic. Now, I know enough to know that if I get scared, I need to not panic, right? But it gives into this idea of panicking. That word right there that is used in the King James and New King James is translated troubled. All Israel was troubled. 2 other words that are used there in English translations are all Israel was frightened, all Israel was terrified. I got to tell you, I think frightened or terrified explains that much better. Yeah, you're troubled. You know, how you feeling? I'm troubled. You'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. How you feeling? I'm terrified. Whoa. What? They're terrified. That's how scared they are. And I want to give you one commentator's commentary on this one. It says, was all Israel panicked because they saw their king losing his grip, or because they too heard about Abner's death in Hebron? Probably both. What would now become of the people who had rejected David and given their allegiance to the trembling weakling of Mahanaim? That's Ishbosheth. They had recently been persuaded by Abner that their future lay with David, but they did not know that their change of heart had accompanied David, nor did they know of how he had responded to the news of Abner's death. I'll begin the beginning of that. All Israel was panicked. They were panicking because of what they had seen. They were terrified. They were frightened. And what it's mostly based on, if you listen to that commentator's quote, what it's mostly based on, it's a lack of assurances. Our king is Ishbosheth. You know, we're following him, and Abner's with him. And now, wait a minute. Now, Abner's gone over to David. What's Ishbosheth going to do? Ishbosheth starts falling apart. And now we hear that Abner has been killed when he went down to David. What happened there? What's David going to do? Ishbosheth's losing his grip. He's not being a leader he needs to be. And you know what? They're starting to panic. Well, when we get scared, we need to have courage. Don't get discouraged. And when we can't panic, but they get panicky. Also, number 3 is we start to get to these 2 characters that do something really terrible and end up having a very bad time of it. And we see that sometimes when people get scared, we can get, number 3, disaffected. We get disaffected. And I really played around with the word right here. And to kind of give you here in 2 and 3, what's the reason that you get this background of where these guys are from? The whole point in verse 2 and verse 3, when you're told who these people are, and by the way, I want to get this in, when it says they are captain of troops, that's actually not a great translation. Some of your other English translations will say they were band leaders. They were some leaders of raiding bands. All right, they weren't really captains of troops. They were leaders of some bands that would go out and do like little raiding parties so they're not like the greatest quality of people. These are not the people that now the nation of Israel is turning to. These are not really leaders. These guys are opportunistic. But what they see happening here is that maybe their allegiance, maybe they picked the wrong side. All right, maybe they picked the wrong side. And so they decide to switch sides. So when we say they're switching sides, how do we know? That's the whole reason that we are told that they were of end of verse 2, middle of verse 2. They were of the children of Benjamin. So what this is telling us is that these were Saul's people. He was from Benjamin. These were Saul's people. These were Ishbosheth's people. And so they decide to switch sides. They become disaffected. They're now turning against who they were with before. In other words, what are they doing? They're betraying their own people. And sometimes when human beings get scared, now those that we were loyal to and good friends with, how many times we see human beings get scared and all of a sudden they turn on one another, don't they? And so what they do, what's their feeling is fear. Oh no, we are affiliated with the losing side of this thing. It's going to go badly for us. So they walk away from their own family, from their own king, from everything they know, because they're scared that they're on the losing side. And sometimes the same thing happens, and a lot of times people betray other people. I'll give you an example, then maybe kind of move on to the next one. But, one example can often be, and this happens with adults, but especially kids and adolescents, right? Where somebody's a really good friend, but then somebody else says something or does something, and I don't want to be thought of as less of a person or less cool or whatever. And so they actually end up sort of siding against them. And they feel like, wait a minute, I thought we were besties. I thought we were best friends. I thought we were close. And now you're just throwing me under the bus. What happens is people get scared that maybe if I align with this person, maybe if I affiliate on this side of this thing, it's going to go bad for me. And people turn on each other. They become disaffected. They become disloyal. And so what it tells us is if we're in committed relationships, when we get scared, we need to resist the temptation to disaffiliate ourselves from people out of fear and turn on them and be disloyal to them. Number 4, when people get scared, we can get reckless. Now, the whole reason that we're given verses 2 and 3 is to establish that these men were of the family of the tribe of Benjamin. This was a betrayal from within the family kind of thing. But then you're given this really weird verse, which is verse 5. Do you notice how the story is all normal and then you're all around it's like all contained, and then you get this verse that tells you about something that happened in the past where this kid got hurt, this 5-year-old got hurt. I don't know if you noticed that. Just kind of look at it. You're rolling along in verse 4. It tells you who these people were. And then all of a sudden, verse 4, it says, Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. And he was 5 years old when the news came about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened, as she had made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth, which is hard for me to pronounce. Oh, and then the next thing you know, it's like when the sons of Rimmon. It's talking about the sons of Rimmon. Then it goes on to talk, and in the middle, it talks about this kid who got hurt in the escape back when Saul and Jonathan died, which had happened here now a few years before. So it's out of nowhere comes this story. You know why it's given? The reason that is stated, that'll be distracting. Wonder if I can figure that one out. The reason why it's being stated is because, the reason why it's being stated is because it's trying to show us that Ishbosheth was the last option now to be king under the lineage of Saul. It's stating that the only person who possibly could have been the king got injured in the escape back when Saul and Jonathan died, and he's lame, and he's a little kid who can't even walk, and he can't function as king. That's the whole reason that's being stated there, because we're to understand that when these men kill Ishbosheth, they are removing the last vestige of Saul's potential dynasty, and now this is an opportunity for David. So when these men kill Ishbosheth, they feel like they are killing the last of Saul's dynasty. That's what a great betrayal this is. But in the essence of being scared, you also see a point. Because what happens here is his nurse, who's taking care of him, when she hears about Saul and Jonathan being killed and all of their brothers, she panics, all right? She gets scared, she panics, and she goes to have him escape. And what happens is there's an accident. So what happens sometimes, I'm submitting to you, is sometimes when we get scared, we get reckless and bad things happen. Here's a good example of that on the smallest level possible. Think it'll start going again? The smallest level possible. When a deer jumps, what do you tell your kids? All right, if you're driving along, it's not if, it's when a deer jumps out in front of you, what do you tell them not to do? Don't swerve off the road, right? Because what do you not want them to do? You don't want them to swerve off the road because they get scared and end up hitting a tree. The deer will give. It'll hurt the car, but they'll probably be fine. And what it is that sometimes when we get scared, we make a reckless decision. Not a single one of us would be driving down the road and then just all of a sudden go over in a ditch. Just all of a sudden pull over in the woods. But that moment in time when something jumps out and scares you, you think, I got to do something. She responds in fear, and she tries to then move so fast to save this boy's life that what ends up happening is he ends up falling in the process, and he ends up getting paralyzed from the waist or the chest down, becomes essentially paraplegic. So sometimes when we get scared, we can get reckless. Number 5 is this. Sometimes when we get scared, we can get careless. We can get careless. And for this, we go back to Ishbosheth. Remember, he's very discouraged. I think you go in this next verse, and it even sounds like he's depressed, because a lot of times when you're dealing with depression, it's like all you want to do is pull the covers over your head, right? And I mean, when it's clinical too, getting out of bed is like one of the hardest things for people to deal with. And so you see that's where he's at. The sons of Ramon, they set out and came at about the heat of the day. So it's the middle of the day, the house of Ishbosheth. And what's the king doing? Is the king supposed to be laying in bed, depressed in the middle of the day? There's a point to this. This is not like, oh, he's taking a siesta. He's taking a nap. Isn't that nice on a nice breeze? No, the point is that this is the middle of the day, and he should be up dealing with the situation. And instead, he's become careless. Why are they able to walk right in his house and stab him in the gut? Because he's gotten careless. Especially as a king in his situation, he needs to be on his guard. He needs to be making sure that the people who are protecting him know exactly what they're doing. He needs to be on purpose with what he's doing, because his kingdom is falling apart, but he gets careless. And, it's that saying, carelessness cost him his life in this occasion, because he's sleeping in the middle of the day and he's gotten careless. It ends up costing him his life. It says that he's lying in his bed at noon and he gets careless. Now, for the next one, we say when people get scared, what they can do. This is what I'm arguing right here. I'm saying the scripture shows us things that can happen. When you're scared, don't get discouraged. Don't get panicky. Don't get disloyal and disaffected. Don't get reckless. Don't get careless. Sounds like all good advice, right? It's not my advice. It's the Bible. Well, here's another one. Sometimes when people get scared, this is something we need to do. But we also need to watch out for this. We can get number 6. We can get predatory. We can get predatory, even violent, even violently predatory. Verse 6 is about as violent as it gets. They go in the guy's house and they stab him in the stomach, and then they cut him to pieces. All right? And they cut off his head. It says in verse 7, they struck him, they killed him, they beheaded him, and then they take his head with him. David later cuts those guys to pieces. That's the one I'm getting to. But for this, they get predatory. And so this can very easy. This is a perfect example of people who are scared, and so they become predators. And certainly we would like to think that this isn't the kind of thing that we're going to deal with, but sometimes when we get scared, it's because somebody's got hurt. All right? We get hurt, somebody we care about gets hurt. Which is worse, when you get hurt or when somebody you care about gets hurt? Yeah. It's the same for all of us. You hurt me, it might make me mad. You hurt my wife or my kids, it really make me mad, all right? And the natural reaction when we get hurt or when somebody, we're scared, all right? What it emerges in us is scared. And the natural thing to do is, if they hurt you, do what to them? Hurt them. to become predatory. And this is even violent. But it's really right here. You will see down in verse 9 that it says, "The Lord has avenged my Lord." They think David is out for vengeance because Saul hurt him. Saul was wrong to him. He thinks that he's out for vengeance. The thing is David's not predatory. David's not scared and looking to appease his fear. He's more level-headed, and we will get to a part here at the end where we get to look at the positive response. But we have to make sure that we don't get predatory, and we have to watch out because you ever notice how a dog that'll bite you is usually a dog is scared? You know what I mean? Like if you scare a dog, it's liable to bite you. And it's the same thing. And there's times when human beings, we can kind of get down to our basis response. Two left here. When people get scared, we can also, number 7, get exposed. It can really expose us for our weakest sort of, our weakest traits, as it were. You and I all have strong traits and weak traits. And we try to make sure that we show each other our strong traits and we keep our weak traits what? Hidden. All right? That's what we all do. We want to put our best foot forward, and that kind of thing. Within the context of good relationships, it's good that you end up becoming exposed really for who you are, because in their growth level. But when people get scared, we can actually end up exposing people. We can actually end up getting exposed for what's wrong with us as well, and for the sin that is in our heart. And so this goes from verses 8 through 10, where you have that they bring the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and they say to him, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged the Lord my king this day of Saul and his descendants." But David comes and he says, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversary, when someone told me, saying, 'Look, Saul is dead,' thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and have executed him in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for this news." And so what he does is he actually exposed them for what they are. They come to him and they're acting like, "Hey, look, we've done you this favor." And what he says is, "No, what you're looking to do is you're looking to abuse a situation, and you've taken somebody's life in your own hands because you think it's advantageous to you." They're getting that. David sees right through them right away. I'll give you this one real quick. So historic account: a queen or an empress gets overthrown, and the usurper who has taken her throne, soon after she takes her throne, within like a month, gets a letter from a high aristocratic woman in that society and says, "I'm so excited about you being the leader, and I just want to tell you I'm in full support of you." And she sends her back a letter and says, "Please," the usurper does, "please, I want you to come to the palace as soon as possible, because I want to show you how I reward someone who so quickly switches their loyalties." And what she's saying is that, you think I'm impressed that I'm the usurper and you so quickly switch loyalties from the old empress to me? She said, that shows me that in the future, you know what you'll do? You'll switch it again. All right. And so when sometimes we get scared, you're thinking she should have kept that letter to herself, but she got exposed. The last is this. This is a grave warning, is this. God can take us out anytime he wants. You know that? He can take people out anytime he wants. And sometimes, number 8, you like that? Letter 8, you can get removed. We can get removed. When we get scared, sometimes we can actually put ourselves in a situation where we get removed. You look down the middle of verse 11. It says, "Therefore shall I not require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth." So sometimes we can actually respond so badly in fear that we actually So maybe some of these things happen in a job. Somebody's scared about their job, so they respond some certain ways, and what happens is they end up losing their job because of it. And if they had handled things better, then they wouldn't have lost their job. We can respond these ways in relationships. We can respond ways in which we get completely removed from the situation. Instead, I'll give you this. Instead of responding in all these bad ways, all right, natural human responses to fear, responding in the flesh. I would give you an example of David shows you how to instead respond in the spirit. And thankfully, we can overcome the 8 with 8 bad points with 3 good points. The first one is this. Instead, when we get scared, number 1, know that God's in control. Know that God is in control. That's huge. When we get scared, sometimes I cut on the news and I get scared for this country. I get scared for this world. I know some of you are nodding at me right now. You feel the same way. And then I'll tell you, if you can back up and say, wait a minute, but God is in control. All right? God is in control. There's a certain calming thing to that right there. I want to give you another quote here from this author. It's a good author. I've been reading him like every week to you. Says, this is the end, their final statement about this chapter right here. Wickedness is never able to thwart God's kingdom. In his infinite wisdom and power, God uses even wicked deeds, which he hates and judges, to advance his purpose. It's his purpose that David would be king, and you notice how he uses this wicked situation to accomplish his goal. The wickedness of Rechab and Balaam, like the wickedness of Judas and those who put Jesus to death, in God's remarkable sovereignty, accomplish God's purpose despite the evil of the actions. Do not fear that the wickedness of men will even hinder God's kingdom. God's king is good, he is wise, and he is very powerful. It is just as his ways are seldom our ways. Success for him can often look like failure to us. Good things can often be scary to you and I. Even things that we would blatantly say, this is bad. But even in this bad situation, God is accomplishing his will. In verse 9, David refers to this. He says, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity. And what he's telling him is, guys, I'm not relying on you who would come and deliver Ishbosheth's head to me. I rely on the God that you just tried to name for your benefit when you said the Lord has avenged my Lord this day. He's saying that's the God I know, and he has worked through every adversity in my life, and he's working through this one right now. The second thing is this. Instead, we must just do what's right. Do what's right. Easier said than done sometimes, isn't it? How do you know what's right? Right here. How do you know what's right? You know that all these things we listed today are bad responses, are examples of not doing what is right. But you see in verses, I just spread it out in verses 10 through 11, you see that David does the right thing in this situation. And then the last is this. Show grace in justice. Show grace in justice. David in this situation has to brutally level out justice. But you notice at the same time the expressions of grace that he gives out. First of all, he calls Ishbosheth, he calls them in verse 11, wicked men, and he calls Ishbosheth, who was his enemy, a righteous person. Right? Because he says at least Ishbosheth was doing things the right way. He may have not been doing what I liked, but he wasn't murdering people like you are. And he comes back and he says at the end that they took the head of Ishbosheth and they buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. So even in the midst of letting out justice upon these wicked men, he's also showing the grace that a lot of times a king would not show. And so it's even in a world of difficulties that we make sure, like David, instead to show grace. And I'll just close with this. You see how all these people in this chapter are acting, and you see how David's acting? Now, when you look at it, I believe you see like me that all those people were responding to fear. They were all acting out of being scared. Does David sound scared? David don't sound scared a lick, does he? That doesn't mean there weren't things going on that scared him. That just means that he's not giving into it. He's responding instead with knowing God is sovereign and doing what is right and showing grace in the midst of justice and even in the midst of injustice. Let's close in a word of prayer. Lord God, we know that there are going to be things in our lives. Some of us are going through things right now. We've been through them. We know we'll go through them that will scare us in this life. Help us to learn from these unrighteous people who, even though they probably had many great qualities, in these times they did not respond as they should. And then help us learn from the righteousness of David, who, though he was not perfect, in this sense models for us how to live in very turbulent times, in very difficult circumstances, and keep the right way about us and not let fear overtake us. I pray, God, this would be beneficial when we face those situations. Please, Lord, take us all home safe here tonight, especially as the roads are wet. And please be with all of those that we have lifted up in prayer this evening. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good night.